to be somewhere else and not here. Maybe change your screens, I don't know. And obviously just keep yourself muted, because rustling of crisp bags in the background, or if I can hear other people pouring glasses of wine and I want them, it's not a good look. Any questions, please pop them in the chat box, and Sue and myself will make sure that each of those get answered as we go through. As you know, I don't have any planned fire alarms for this evening, so should your fire alarm go off, please use your nearest exit. And your host is not, or myself, can't provide individual advice this evening. This is just general information. And then if you want to get in touch with either Sue or myself at the end of the evening, you can do that. And then we can obviously discuss whatever it is we need to discuss with you privately. So I'm just going to move on to the legal update. My computer is a little bit slow this evening. I do apologise. So everything is just going a little bit slower than I would normally expect. So what I'm going to talk about first off is the court case that happened earlier today, which has just broke pretty much the internet with regards to no DSS. Now, I've managed to get hold of the transcript from the court, and I've had a read through of what this actually means. And what this actually means is it was a county court decision. So with a county court decision, this means this isn't binding in law. But what it does mean is any other court that has a similar case brought in front of it is 9 times out of 10 likely to go with what a county court decision has already made. So in this particular situation, you had a lady who applied to a letting agent, and she advised them that although she was working, she was also in receipt of benefits. And they just had a blanket policy that it was a no. So Shelter were representing the tenant. They went to court. The letting agent decided to see it all the way through to the end, and the judge ruled that to have a blanket policy of saying no to anyone on benefits is discriminatory. So what that means for us is, moving forward, when we're advertising our properties, we can't put in the advert no DSS or no benefit tenants. We can't have that wording anymore. Most of the portals, as far as I'm aware, Zoopla, Rightmove and Spareroom, have already started deleting adverts that have got that written in. So that's an issue. If you've got your adverts up, just go back and check them, because they may not be there anymore if you've got that wording in. But it also means when we're working with our letting agents, we need to understand the policies that our letting agents have got. Do they have a blanket policy? If they do, you need to be considering what conversations you're having with them with regards to this, because it could be a case of they get fined, but obviously, as we all know, even though you have a letting agent, everything falls back on you as a landlord at the end of the day. The other thing that we've also seen coming out of this today is a lot of the mortgage lenders are changing their terms and conditions. We've seen that filter through already, and some of the products have been withdrawn from the market with regards to rent guarantee insurance, and they have been resubmitted with a change to their guidance as well. So all of this has had a bit of a knock-on effect in a knee-jerk reaction, but for the positive. So all that will happen is, moving forward, you can't discriminate against someone just because they're on benefits, but there's nothing stopping you putting a process in place that shows affordability. So for example, if you're renting a property out and your property is £700 a month, but somebody in that area will only get their housing benefit or universal credit to £650 a month, but they've no way of topping it up, you can say to them that the property is not affordable, but you'd have to demonstrate that should they ever come back to you and say, why have you said no? Is it because I'm on benefits? As long as you can demonstrate why you've chosen not to take them, and it isn't solely because they're on benefits, but it's because they can't afford the property or options like that, then that's fine moving forward, having read the outcome of this court case. But it's quite possible that it will change the legislation moving forward. We might see something go through Parliament. We might see a specific act or an amendment to an act to bring this in as law, but as yet it's just a county court judgment. I'm just going to move on to electrical safety. As we all know, on the 1st of June, the electrical safety inspections came into force for the private rented sector, and they affected all tenancies from the 1st of July. Now, there was a bit of a hoo-ha about this, The legislation came out, the guidance came out, the guidance was wrong, the guidance went back in. I think that happened about 2 or 3 times, and I don't think there currently is any active guidance that you can find. But it basically means you need a 5-year electrical test for your property for any tenancies signed on or after the 1st of June. And as of the 1st of April next year, you'll need it regardless of whether your tenancy is ongoing, rolling or new. And it really is as simple as that. I've done a quick video for it on YouTube. It's about 20 minutes and it just runs through the whole legislation in bullet points and just gives you some slides to have a look at there. Just a reminder of the tenant fee ban. Obviously, this came into force last year, but the second part of the legislation did come into force on the 1st of June this year. So that means if you have got a rolling tenancy, a periodic, that has a clause in it that says you have a fixed fee for rent arrears, or you have a fixed fee for an inventory, that fee is basically just null and void now. Your tenancy agreement is still fine, all 4 corners of it still work, but just the individual clauses that revert to fees will be null and void, they'll be unenforceable. Gas safety inspections. There was a big uproar with regards to gas safety inspections. There was a case that went through the county court, and then there was the Court of Appeal court case, which was Trecarrell versus Rouncefeld, which happened earlier this month. I forget what month I'm in, yes. Which basically meant if you serve a Section 21, you have to ensure that a gas certificate was served before the tenancy started. Now, this was known and bounded around in property world, and it was just called the Monty Schultz case. Now, this basically is how we then moved forward from 2019. This is how we all worked. If we hadn't served a gas certificate at the start of the tenancy, we couldn't use a Section 21, and we'd basically promoted our tenancies to assured as apart from assured short hold. However, earlier this month, we got a completely different outcome from the Court of Appeal in Trecarrell versus Rouncefeld, and that basically says as long as the gas inspection was carried out, you can still serve a Section 21 as long as the certificate was then served to the tenant prior to the service of the Section 21. That was the only way you could remedy it. What you couldn't do is have a tenant move in at the start of the tenancy, carry out no gas inspection at all, and then try and backdate that remedy. So all it means is if you've not done the admin, if you just haven't given the gas safety inspection, that could now be remedied by serving it just before you serve the Section 21. But if you just haven't carried out the gas safety before they moved in, then unfortunately you won't be able to use a Section 21, and you will be in a situation where you've got an assured tenancy, and you'll be looking at a Section 8 notice to try and evict. An extension to the eviction suspensions. As we know, the courts have been extended until the 24th of August. So you can still serve notice though. You can still serve a Section 21, you can still serve a Section 8, but they must be 3 months notice, and that 3 months notice carries on until the 30th of September. And then after the 30th of September, we assume at this stage that everything will revert back to normal, but we don't know. It's possible it could extend. And obviously, just be mindful that Section 21s do have a 6-month shelf life. I've spoken to a couple of landlords that now realise that the Section 21s they served in January, unfortunately, have run out, and they can't now apply to court and get their application in and stop the clock. They'll have to serve a new Section 21 with the 3 months notice. So it's just to be mindful that they have the 6-month shelf life from the day they're served, and it's important to get your application into the court as soon as the Section 21 expires, so that you stop the clock on the 6 months and you get that moving forward for you. So that's me with my little legal update finished. The next thing I'm just going to bring up for you is our YouTube channel. So that's our YouTube channel, Hemel Property TV. Everything that we do, so all of the webinars that I do, all of these events are all then uploaded onto the YouTube channel, and you can access that at any time you wish. I will just let you know that this Friday at 10 a.m. I'm doing one of my quarterly residential landlord association meetings. That'll be at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. That's free of charge, and that's with our residential rep called Victors. I won't really be hosting. I will just be there to let people in, tick boxes and make sure everyone's muted. It will literally be a National Residential Landlords Association meeting. So anybody that wants to come along to that, all the links are on the website. They're on the Facebook page, and they've obviously gone out with newsletters with anyone that is one of those as well. The last thing I just want to go over is our annual dinner. So next year we will be 10 years old, which I can't actually really believe, having remembered the very first one in the Holiday Inn with 2 people and they were both my friends. So I've come quite away from there. So it's a 10-year anniversary dinner on the 30th of June. And we will have our 2 guest speakers are Jamie Lester, who was obviously on The Apprentice, and he has run multiple letting agents, estate agents, property businesses, and obviously Paul Champlina from Landlord Action will be our other guest speaker. Because I don't want to be the hostess with the mostess that particular night, I've managed to get one of the fantastic screenwriters and sitcom writers, Bennett Aaron, who is going to be our comedy host, compare, you name it, for the evening, so that gives me a bit of a night off. There are early bird tickets available, and there are speakers table tickets available as well, and that's just on the website under the events as normal. So anybody that's interested in that, again, that does go out with the newsletter. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to pass over to Sue, unless anyone's got any questions for me on the legally updates and stuff. No, we're all good. Fab. Okay.
Julia was just asking, how long do we need on Friday for the National Resident Landlords Association?
Probably about an hour and a half, maybe, I would think.
It was sort of showing up from 10 till 1, I think, on the when it put it into the calendar, so I was just checking.
Oh, it won't be that long. Goodness.
Okay, cool. I was panicking a bit.
Oh, goodness, no.
Thanks.
Right. No problem. Right, Sue, it's over to you.
Thank you, and I'm hoping you've got my slides now. If I could just give you a prompt as we need to go from each other would be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you see them?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you, Julie, for inviting me to talk to your members today. I'm really pleased to have that opportunity. And I really just want to talk to people just a little bit about my background, how I got into social housing, why I think social housing is a really good option at the moment. And then there's just some takeaways as well for you. So if we could just go to the next screen. Maybe not.
Sorry, we're a little bit slow this evening, sorry.
Oh, that's after the day that I've had. Slow screen is fine. So this is me and my dad. My dad is really the reason why I got into property in the first instance. So Dad had always been a property investor. He was a really forward-thinking man. I'm really lucky to have him. And back in the 70s and 80s, before there was buy-to-let mortgages, before there was interest-only mortgages, Dad was a student landlord, and he had a few properties that he let in the student market. And when I was 21, my dad said to me, "Sue, I found a property that I think would be good for you to buy. I think it's about time that you did something." And I then needed to go and see a bank manager. So if I could just go to the next screen, or the next slide. So when I went to the bank manager, initially I went to see my dad's bank manager, and I'm sure that you could probably imagine at 21 what it's like when you've had to put together a business proposal, you've got to put together all of your numbers. And Dad's bank manager was lovely. He said, "Yeah, that's fine, I'll certainly loan you the money, but we want your dad to be the guarantor." And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I really want to be able to do it under my own steam. I don't want Dad to be the person that's having to back me, so that if he goes wrong, he bails me out. So I then went to see, and I'll never forget him, Mr. Finn at Midland Bank. And this was back in the days when you could actually meet a bank manager. It wasn't a case of the computer says no. You could go and talk to somebody and they could actually make an informed decision. And I was very fortunate because he said, yes, we'll loan you the money. And from there, then I was able to buy my first property. If we could go to the next screen. And I think we always say that sort of like property is really cyclical, and this absolutely just demonstrates where we are with it. So this is the first property that I bought back in 1987, and it's now home to my lettings business. We've gone through a rebranding since then, and we're now called Genie Rooms. We're not Property Genie any longer. And that property had always been let in the whole of the time that I'd owned it, up until the 6 months before I decided that I wanted to open a lettings business. And it just made perfect sense. If I was going to have to pay rent to anybody to have a property, it made sense to pay it to me and my sister, because we now own it jointly. So that was sort of like the beginning of me building a property portfolio. And I've done it very slow, very steadily over the last 30 years. I've now got more than 40 properties, and they're spread across quite a range of different business models. So I've got buy-to-let, 2 and 3 bedroom houses. We've got some 2-bedroom flats. Then I've got some houses which are leased for social housing. I've got an HMO, and we've got 5 serviced accommodation apartments. So I pretty much have tried lots of different things, but I quite like having a diverse portfolio because I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket, and it's just sort of like evening things out. If we could go to the next slide, please. So over that 30 years, not everything has gone right. I have made mistakes, and I think if you talk to anybody in property and they say to you, I've never made a mistake, they're not in property, because I don't believe that anybody has never made a mistake. This was one of what at the time it caused us lots of stress, lots of hassle, and this was a property which was a traditional 3-bed semi, where you got your 2 big bedrooms upstairs and a tiny little box room. And so we decided that we wanted to increase the size of the house to make it into a proper family home. And we bought it with the intention that we were going to flip it. So we spent a lot of money in terms of the finish and everything else. So what we've done, if you look on the photograph, you can see on the left-hand side is a 2-story extension. And then across the back of the property, we did a 1-story extension as well. But during all of the work that we were doing on the house, both myself and my business partner split up with our partners. And as a result of that, lost control of the build, lost control of the builder, lost control of how much money was being spent, lost control of the time schedule. And unfortunately, this was all taking place at the same time that the property market crashed. So the property that we bought, which if we'd have actually kept control of the project, would have been finished before the property market crashed, actually got finished 3 months later. So that property that we were going to sell, we just weren't able to recoup all the money back. And it's really strange now when I think about that property. We did things with that house which I didn't even know was a strategy. So we've made it big enough that that could actually now be a 6-bedroom HMO. And we also, in terms of being able to get that property finished, we borrowed money from absolutely everybody that we possibly could. And I didn't know what we were doing was actually using angel finance. But I think my learning from that was, regardless of what is going on in your private life, property is a business. You have to treat it as a business, and you can't let it escape you, because if you do, you can end up in a situation that is very, very difficult to get back. Now, that house is probably the biggest house on the road. It's the nicest house on the road, and it's washed its face because we've been able to get a really good rental for the house ever since it's been finished. But in hindsight, if we'd have known that we were going to rent it, we wouldn't have spent as much on the finish on the inside of the house as we did. and it's taken up until probably the last 12 months for that property to be worth the value that it would have been if the market hadn't crashed back in 2007, 2008. So that's the sort of length of time. If we put it on the market now, we could recoup all the money that we spent on it. So I think it's really, really important. Treat anything that you're doing in property as a business. If we could just go to the next screen. So this was a property. We didn't buy the whole of it. I bought one of the flats in there, which is, it's a city centre apartment block. And we bought it off plan. And we had to put down £1,000 deposit to reserve the apartment. And at the time, this was back in 2004, the estate agents that were selling it said it would rent out for between £900 and £1,200 a month. We ran all of our numbers thinking, okay, will this work if we get £800 a month? So we thought we'd been quite conservative. And when we actually bought the flat, we were only able to achieve £550 a month. Now, we had feelings all through the process, right up until when we completed on it, that it didn't feel right. But because we'd spent that £1,000 on a reservation fee, we didn't want to lose £1,000. But in hindsight, we should have just walked away. We shouldn't have been pig-headed. We should have just thought, we've made a mistake, admit it, walk away. And I think from that, I would just say to anybody, it is much, much better that you make a small loss at the outset than try to hang on to something that actually at the end of the day, you could end up making a much bigger loss. So just always be aware that there is nothing at all wrong with being able to put your hand up and say, I've made a mistake, and that's not the right thing to do. And if we could go to the next screen, please. So again, I talk to lots of people who invest away from their home area. So like I've known lots and lots of southern investors say they invest in the north, and it always makes me smile because they call Birmingham the north, and I always think we're in the Midlands. But because the south is so expensive to invest, so they need to find other areas to invest in. And I think it's really, really key that you understand the area where you're going to invest. So this house, the picture of is, I've got another 2 houses like this that are identical, and we bought them within half a mile of each other. These are in a B1 postcode, which is a city centre postcode for Birmingham. It's probably one of the best postcodes in Birmingham if you want to be in the city centre. And it's walking distance of everything in the city. But they're on an absolutely horrible estate. And when I talked to any of my friends about buying them, they all said to me, Sue, why are you looking at buying there? Because it's horrible. I said, I've just got a gut instinct, because there is so much building work going on all around here, and it's so close to the city centre that the price is going to go up. So what I'm saying is you need to do a lot of research. And if you're investing away from your own area, try and find somebody who is a real expert in their area. Not just somebody who says they're an expert, but somebody who actually is and can really demonstrate that they've got knowledge as to why you would recognise them to be an expert. So these houses that I bought coming up to 3 years ago, we paid 135 to 140, and you can't buy anything on that estate now for less than 185. So we have had the capital growth that we were looking for. But again, I think that is really important, that wherever you decide that you are going to buy, you need to understand, are you buying for cash flow or are you buying for capital growth? Because again, that will have an influence on where it is that you want to buy. So that's just really another tip. Just make sure that if you are going to buy away from your own area, that you really do lots of research and due diligence before you start investing. Can we go to the next screen? And so this was the very first property that I bought that we used for social housing. And again, this was just sort of like a little bit of a fluke. I went to view the property put in an offer, but somebody else offered higher than I did. So I just thought, okay, it's not meant to be. I walked away because I thought I'm not going to get into a situation of sort of like outbidding the other person, because it just becomes a Dutch auction. And then 3 months later, the estate agent rang me to say the property's fallen through. Would you be interested? So we then went ahead and we bought it. And that was the very first property that we used for social housing. And if I could go to the next screen, this just is a demonstration of why I think that understanding numbers is really important, because that house was big enough for us to have two different strategies. We could either have it as a 6-bed all-en-suite HMO, or we could use it as a 5-bed 2-bathroom HMO. Now, up until this point, and my dad, for years and years and years, had always said to me, Sue, you need to understand your numbers and you need to work out what your percentage return is that you're getting on your investment. I was going, Dad, no, I don't. I'm only bothered about what my cash flow is, because if I'm happy with the cash flow, that's fine. And Dad was like, no. Anyway, when we bought this house, one of the other guys that I work with now said to me, Sue, you've got to sit down and work out how is going to be best of what you want to do with that house. So he sat me down and we actually worked out the numbers. And that was then, it was like that light bulb moment that really made me change my view. So if we just compare the two columns, if we take the middle column first, that is the column of using that house as an HMO all en suite. So most of the figures are the same till when you come to the refurb figure, which is 60,000, because that's roughly what it was going to take for us to create everything we wanted to. But that did give me the option that we could refinance the property, because we had actually done something to significantly change it to get an increase in value. But we were still going to be leaving nearly 80,000 left in the deal. Rent on the property roughly would be about 25,000, and then we've got bills, voids, maintenance, management, all of those things to take off. So that brought it down to a cash flow of about £10,000 and the ROI of 13%. But then when I looked at like the right-hand column, which is the column where we're using it as a 5-bed 2-bathroom HMO, and it was going to be leased for social housing, you can see where the differences lie. The refurb only cost me £18,000. I was only leaving 58,000 in the deal, so significantly less money in the property, and this is without refinancing. The rent was significantly lower, but I didn't have any bills to pay. I didn't have to take into account any voids. I didn't have any maintenance, because all of that is covered within the lease. The mortgage is a little bit higher, so my cash flow on that is 9,100, but my ROI is almost 16%. And that was when it actually came home to me. My money works harder on an option where my cash flow was less. But it's also meant as well that instead of spending 60,000 on one property, I was spending 18,000, which left me with another 32,000, which was the deposit for another property. So I think it's really important that you do understand and you run for every single deal that you do, all of the different options of what you can do with that property, because there's lots of different things that you can do with it. If we could then go to the next screen. Thank you. So these sort of like, I needed to make a decision about what I was doing with my own portfolio of properties when Section 24 came in. It's about 3-4 years ago. Because I've bought my properties over such a long period of time, I'm being massively hammered for tax. So I needed to find a way that I could make my existing portfolio work harder. And the way that we did that was by converting some of my 3-bedroom family homes into 4-bedroom HMOs that we then use for social housing. This is the sort of like fairly average stock of the type of properties that we're using. So they're ex-council properties, they're solidly built, and they're big enough to be able to create 4 bedrooms. So if we can go to the next slide. And this is just to show you, again, it's a comparison of the numbers and why I like this model of a 4-bedroom HMO that we lease for social housing. So the middle column is if the property were let as a straightforward family home. So you've got a refurb of 5,000 because I'd only really be looking at doing a cosmetic refurb, rent 7,800 and a cash flow of just under 4,000. Same property, but the refurb is an extra 10,000, so we're spending 15,000, but the rent increases from 7,800 to 13,500. I've stress tested it with a mortgage rate that is higher, because your mortgage rates for a mortgage that you're going to be using for a property for social housing where you have a lease and where you have vulnerable tenants is generally higher. So again, you can see the cash flow goes up to over 7,500. So the return on your investment is going from 9% to just over 14%. And this is why, for me, it's just massively helped me with my own portfolio, and why I now love talking to other investors about it and saying, look, this is an option. I know it works, and it does work across the country. So if we could just go to the next screen. So I think this is just basically, because lots of people say to me, how do you decorate property for social housing? What does it need to look like? This just gives you an idea. Very plain, very simple. Everywhere is white walls, white ceilings, white woodwork. We put vinyl flooring all the way through the property. This was a property that they'd already tiled on the kitchen floor, so we left those down. And then fully furnished, but just very, very simply. So bed, wardrobe, chest of drawers, bedside cabinets in the bedrooms, in the kitchen, the white goods plus a dining table and chairs, and in the living room, sofas. So it's very, very simple. It looks clean, it looks fresh, it's nothing expensive. If you are one of these people who wants everybody to be patting you on the back and blowing smoke up your bottom when you put all these beautiful pictures of HMOs on Facebook, you won't want to do an HMO for social housing, because it is not beautiful. It's simple, it's minimalistic, and it is usable. And it looks, for me, it looks nice, but it's not one of those where you're going to have 120 comments of everybody saying, oh, isn't it beautiful, regardless of whether they actually agree with it or not. But sorry, that's a whole different matter. So that's just what like a property that we use for social housing looks like. And if we can go to the next screen, this just shows you some of the properties that are in my own portfolio that are being used. So top left hand, it's just, there's a 2-bedroom flat in that block of flats that's used by a Syrian refugee family through a housing association. Bottom left, there's a 3-bedroom duplex apartment that's used for temporary supported accommodation. The property in the middle, again, it's a 2-bedroom property, and that's leased to a housing association. And then the one on the far right is, again, that's a 4-bedroom, again, that's just leased to a social housing provider. So there isn't, what I would say to you, a standard type of property. It's just much more going to be what the individual company that you're going to work with is looking for, and whether or not then it's going to be an HMO or you're just leasing a normal sort of like buy-to-let property. So if we could go to the next screen. So this is just giving you some of the reasons why I like social housing and why I think that it works really well. Is one, you get guaranteed rent. So regardless of how many people are living in property, the housing provider that is leasing it from you will pay your rent every single month in full. So if it's a 4-bedroom HMO, you still get paid full rent even if they've only got one person living there. So for me, it maximises the return on your investment. You're supporting the local community and the people who are in need, because you're providing homeless people with a roof over their heads, and you're providing them with a nice, comfortable home. Majority of the maintenance is undertaken by the social housing provider, so you're not having to worry too much about maintenance. And all of the bills are paid for by the social housing provider as well. And obviously, I think one thing I've missed off there are no voids. So if you've got a lease for 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it is that you agree, you know absolutely if it's a 5-year lease, you are going to get your rent paid for 60 months with no gaps. So for me, it's all the way around, it just works. If we could go to the next screen. So for me then, when I always think about this, it's sort of like it's a winning situation. So it's winning for the social housing provider because you're providing a house for them. It's winning for you as a landlord because you're getting paid additional rent, no voids, no maintenance, or very, very little maintenance. And obviously it's a win for that homeless person that is being provided with a home. So I always think for me, it's quite nice that you can actually find that sort of like strategy that works for everybody. If we could just go to the next screen. This is just really, it's almost like it's a motto that I live by. If you can create a life that you love, you'll never work another day in your life. So I'm really, really fortunate. I never have a Monday morning when I'm getting up thinking, I don't want to go to the office today. I never have a Sunday night where I'm thinking, oh, it's Monday tomorrow and I've got to start all over again. So find something that can be a passion that you absolutely love, and it, tell you what, it just makes everything so much easier. So if you can just think about that, I'm really fortunate. Property was something that I fell into, and it's absolutely what I love. My friends laugh at me because they will say to me, Sue, you talk about what you love all day, every day to everybody. And you know, I'm really lucky, and I'm here and I'm talking to you guys this evening. So for me, it's fabulous. And then if we just go to the last screen, you've got my contact details. If there's anything then that you want to know from me. I hope that quite briefly, because I didn't want to go through 30 years of property investing and sort of like talking to you about all the different properties that we've bought and sold. But if you've got any questions, then I'm more than happy to answer any of the questions that you've got.
Fab, thanks for that, Sue. That was brilliant. Has anybody got any questions for Sue? If you, there's not as many on this evening as I was anticipating. So if you just want to unmute yourself to ask a question, that might just be easier.
Yes, please.
Fire away.
So thanks for that. I'm a private sector landlord. Is there a difference between social housing and LHA?
Yeah, very much so. So LHA is the rate that you are paid as, it's the LHA rate, so it's the local housing authority rent. You're not with this leasing your property to a housing benefit tenant. You're not leasing it to the council, you are leasing it to a housing association, a social housing provider. So you have a lease between you as the property owner and them as the company that are paying for the property.
And they will pay you LHA rates, will they?
No, not necessarily. So when we were talking about that 4-bedroom HMO, they are paying me a rate which is based on the LHA rate with a little bit of an enhancement. But that house, if I was to rent it out privately, would probably get me a rate of, say, £700 a month as a 3-bedroom family home. But because I've converted it and it's leased to a housing provider, I get paid £11.25 a month for it.
Yes, of course. I mean, yeah, housing provider. I mean, what are these? Are they called housing associations? Are they the ones?
Yeah. There's housing associations, there are social housing providers, they are supported living companies, they're assisted living companies. They've got lots and lots and lots of different descriptions.
How do you track them down?
Google.
Yeah. So not via the council. They're a separate entity.
The council will have a list of organisations that are registered with them that you could then ask for. But if this is something that you want to do, then there are no shortcuts. It is literally just a case of getting on the phone, making the phone calls, and then finding the organisation that you want to work with.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean it's a possibility. I mean, I was sitting there thinking, you know, as you were talking, saying, yeah, but she's not making comparisons here with any of the private sector HMO rates that you can get, where your ROI is going to be yet higher again. But I suppose by the time you've commuted in the fact that they're paying all the bills, it's worth running the numbers again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the difference that I showed you between the 6-bed all-en-suite and the 5-bed 2-bathroom. So that was the difference there. The 6-bed all-en-suite was if it was going to be a private HMO with working people versus the 5-bedroom 2-bathroom with a lease to social housing.
Okay, I didn't notice the difference in costs there. I was looking at all the other figures. So there was a substantial difference in costs there, were there? Maintenance and costs.
Yeah, your conversion cost for a 6-bed all-en-suite is going to be about £60,000.
That's the refurbishment, yeah.
Yeah, whereas for that 5-bed 2-bathroom cost me 18,000, and that was fully furnished, keys handed over to the housing provider.
Yeah, sure. Those are your refurb costs. Yeah, I was sort of approaching it from the running costs, bills and utilities and maintenance.
Julie, is there any possibility you can put that slide back up for me? Is that awkward?
No.
Good.
No.
Yeah, I was trying to get my head around the figures as well. I think it wasn't clear that the 6-bed all-en-suite was a private HMO as such.
I assumed it was, but couldn't see a difference there in the running costs.
Right. If you look at that, as you go down the middle column, you've got rent of 25,200, and then under that you've got bills, voids, maintenance, management, 10,080.
Yeah.
But if you look in the other column, the only figure that you've got to take out of it is management.
Yeah.
So there's a significant difference, because on the 6-bed you've got £10,000, and on the other one you've got 1,600.
Yes, sure. No, I can see it now. Clear as a bell.
So that's why, I mean, with that one, the ROI there's not significantly different, but what was really important as far as I was concerned with that was the amount of money. Okay, when we look at total money left in the deal, there's only 20,000, but the actual amount of money that I didn't have to find, it left me with 32,000 left over.
Don't follow that, sorry. What do you mean?
Because the refurb on the 6-bed all-en-suite was going to cost me 60,000, whereas the one when I did it for a 5-bed 2-bathroom only cost me 18,000. So the difference between the two was 32,000.
I'm confused. Sorry.
I can't hear you, Melinda. What was that question?
Sorry, I was just saying that 32,000 and 18,000 only make 50,000. Am I adding the wrong figures together here?
No, 18,000 and 32. Okay, yeah, that's my. Oh, in which case I had 42,000 left over to play with, not 32. That's my math.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
Yeah,
so that 42,000, you didn't have to use £42,000 of your money in this particular situation, which you would have otherwise had to do. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
the benefit also is you've got less hassle.
Huge,
you haven't got any voids or whatever to deal with.
Absolutely. And I don't have to deal with any maintenance either. So if there was something major that went wrong, like the central heating boiler breaks, then I've got to deal with the central heating boiler. If tiles blow off the roof, I've got to deal with that. So anything that is more structural is my responsibility. Anything else is their responsibility. So if they've got...
insurance is that sort of thing?
What's about what, sorry?
Are you responsible for insuring the property?
Yes.
Well,
yeah, so the difference in the insurance is probably going to be double. So on my normal buy-to-lets, I pay about 200 to 250 a year, whereas on my houses that are used for social housing, we're paying between 400 and 500.
Wow.
Okay.
And apart from those maintenance costs, like structural maintenance costs, and the insurance, what else are you responsible for other than the mortgage?
Nothing.
Okay.
So if they've got a tenant in the property who's got an anger management problem, who puts their fist through a wall, it's their responsibility to repair it. If there's a leaky kitchen sink, it's their responsibility. If they have a blocked toilet, it's their responsibility. So I would say to you that probably 90% of maintenance issues is going to be down to them to sort out. I mean, there's some of my properties that I've handed over, other than going in and doing a quarterly inspection, I haven't had to spend any money on them for 2 or 3 years. Which is one of the reasons why I love it as an option.
Who can I ask, who typically are the best people to approach to find what the demand in any given area is? Is it the council or is it some other body?
No, it'll be the individual companies that I've just spoken to you about. So it's literally, so one of my partners in property members who invests, I think he's in the southeast. My geography is not brilliant, but yeah, I'm sure he's the southeast. He came on the seminar that I used to run about social housing. He came on that in October, and it was when I spoke to him last month. He said, I've probably made between 400 and 500 phone calls to different types of organisations to try to find a company that I can work with. And it has literally only been in the last month that he's found 4 different companies that are prepared to work with him. So you could fall really lucky that in your area that there could be a lot of organisations that you can potentially work with, or it could be like Callum has found. He's literally had to put in loads and loads of legwork. However, it is now paying off for him because he knows next property that he buys, he's now got contacts with different companies and he knows what their requirements are.
So what department are you trying to reach in the social housing company?
Well, they're not usually very big. So normally you could speak to an operations manager, a housing officer. It just depends on sort of like how big the organisation is. And what go on, sorry.
No, you finish what you're saying. I was going on to another question, so don't worry.
Okay, I was going to say, I would be much more inclined to pick the phone up and make a phone call and get a contact than send emails, because I think emails tend to pretty much go into black holes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. In terms of requirements for specifications, I mean, I know you said just keep it sort of really simple, but are there any other things that need to be provided that we wouldn't necessarily think about, or does it sort of fit in with a normal, I mean, I'm still early on my property journey anyway, but would it fit in with normal requirements for an HMO, or is it literally by...
No, so that house that I showed you is completely HMO compliant. So it had all its fire doors, emergency lighting, interlinked smoke detectors, window restrictors on upstairs windows, TV sockets in each of the bedrooms. So it's pretty much standard what you would do with an HMO. But I know that the specification from the providers that I work with, they just want simple. But you would need to be speaking to a provider that you're going to be working with, and they will give you their specification of what they want, or you will agree it together. Because some of the providers, they don't want furniture. They're just happy to have an empty house. So you need to understand that before you go out and completely furnish a house, because you might find then that you've given them stuff that they don't actually want.
Yeah. Cool. And what's the sort of typical length of term of contract?
Again, it's what you negotiate with the provider. We've got contracts that go from 2 years to 7 years. And the guys that are signing up for the 7-year contracts, they ideally want 10 years, but they're doing a 7 or a 6 year and 11 month to begin with. So it doesn't have to get registered with Land Registry.
I don't know that rule, but as I said, I'm early in my journey, so.
Yes,
okay.
What is that rule?
So if you've got a lease, which is 7 years or more, it has to be it is Land Registry. It has to get registered with. Thanks, Julie. I love that nod.
Sue, just trying to sort of reverse engineer some of the maths behind this. Who's financing social housing? Where does social housing get their money?
But it depends on who it is. So, for example, if it's a general social house provider that is providing temporary supported accommodation, which is most of the stuff that the providers do that I work with, it's coming from the local council and social services. But if you're dealing with a company who potentially are just looking after asylum seekers, then that comes from the Home Office. So there's lots of different pots as to where the funding could potentially come from, dependent upon the organisation that you're working with.
So what's in it for the state? The state are paying them slightly, or you're ending up with slightly over LHA rates, and they've got the added, I suppose, they've got the added cost of paying all the bills as well.
But it's less than paying bed and breakfast, surely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I suppose the answer is that these are specialist needs. It's not just people on universal credit. It is, as Sue's just been saying, asylum seekers and people who may be in more specialist need.
No, not necessarily. So basically, what you will normally find, if somebody is eligible for temporary supported accommodation because they're homeless, it's because they will have an element of support need as well, which might only be something like 3 hours a week. But to qualify, if they qualify for that, then they will qualify for the temporary supported accommodation. And the companies that are then looking after them get paid significantly more, which is why it makes it such a, at the minute, a really sort of like popular area that lots and lots of people are trying to get into.
Yeah. I think that's the point I was trying to make. These aren't just people who are recipients of universal credit. They have some other additional or specialist or niche need, which is provided by the social housing providers, rather than the state just saying, here's a bit of money, you sort yourself out. There's a degree of them being sorted out as well.
Yeah, but when we're talking about a specialist need, most of these people have just been homeless. So they haven't specifically got sort of like mental, that they're not sort of like have got a mental incapacity or they need care from that perspective. It's more a case they've been down on their luck. They might have then become sort of like addicted to alcohol, addicted to drugs. It might be somebody who's coming out of prison. There's lots of different reasons why people become homeless.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that as well. So one of the jobs that I've done in a previous life, I was actually a housing coordinator for DENS, which is the homeless charity here in Hemel. And we did the lease option for landlords in the private rented sector, and we were doing 2 to 5 year leases. But from the council's point of view, to have organisations that work with private landlords that can house people that are street homeless, whether they've got additional needs or not, for every person that approaches the council as homeless, it costs the council £16,000 per person to get that person all the way through the homeless journey, all the way to being housed. So if every council can save themselves £16,000 per person because somebody can be housed in a different way, then you can see where the state would be happy to put the money in one pot and obviously not spend it with all the people that are homeless in an area.
And potentially provide a better solution as well.
Yeah. And a more sustainable solution, because you'll find a lot of the times if somebody is homeless and they go through do a homeless application and go through the council, they'll have temporary accommodation, then have interim accommodation before a property becomes available. And sometimes that person can be literally transient all the way through for maybe 2 or 3 years before they found the settled accommodation, whereas this way somebody can be settled almost immediately.
And Sue, are you generally handing over these properties furnished or unfurnished?
Furnished. So literally like the slide I put up.
Okay.
But as you said, some of them don't want furniture.
No, so it's really important that what I would say is very much is like find your end user before you start at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
And so how long is the process from sort of first approaching a company to them actually taking possession?
It's really hard for me to say that because I've been doing this now for about 4 years. So I can have an investor come to me to say they've just bought a property and I will know straight away who the end user is going to be. So it's just a case that going through conveyancing, going through refurb, and then as soon as it's finished, it's ready to be signed over.
Right, okay.
So I think what you're sort of like talking about, and I think it's that's what I'm saying, is that you need to do all the research in the beginning, so that before you go and buy your property, or if you've got a property that is already tenanted and is becoming vacant, before you decide that you're going to use it for social housing, you need to know that you've got a company that are going to lease it from you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
I've got one question for you, Sue, actually. When you're looking at buying property in a particular area, or when you're working with investors, because you already know who your end user is going to be, does that then change where you would purchase a property in a particular area of a town? So do you not necessarily go for the high end of property? If it's going to be used for social housing, you may get a cheaper property in a different end of town. Do you factor that in, or do you just wait for the best property to come along?
No, we work it out so that we know in the first instance what the investor wants. So is that investor buying it because it's more important for them to get cash flow, or is it more important for them to get capital growth? So if what they're looking for, and I have got a couple that I work with, that they are just buying with the view that they both want to get out of their jobs. So cash flow is absolutely to them much more important than capital growth. So they will buy in the less desirable areas where the properties are cheaper because their cash flow is going to be better. But then I've got other investors that are in it for sort of like the long term, and it's more important for them is their capital growth that they're going to get. So they will buy in a slightly more expensive area. But generally, we're not buying in the best areas because the houses are going to be too expensive for the numbers to work. So again, it all comes down to running your numbers and deciding what is your maximum purchase price, because you're already going to know what your rental price is going to be. And then you can work backwards as to say, right, I want to achieve 10% ROI. Therefore, for the numbers to work, I can't afford to buy it more than X.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the housing provider will give an indicative rent figure to you so that you can work your figures back. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, because you will always negotiate your rent with them. So you will know in advance, dependent on the type of property, what the rent is that you're going to be able to command for it.
Just changing to another question, if I can, Sue. Is there a type or size of property that social housing providers prefer? Are they after 2-bedroom flats or 5-bedroom HMOs?
No, that's where you need to talk to each individual company and find out what it is that they want. So I've got some providers that just literally want to have from me 2-bedroom flats and houses. 3 bedrooms in Birmingham don't really work because a 3-bedroom house has got to be made HMO compliant. But the additional rate that you get for that is probably only going to be about £90 a month. So to only get £90 a month means it's not worthwhile doing all of the HMO conversion to make it compliant. So 3 beds we don't really do anything with particularly. And then 4 beds upwards, again, it very much depends on who and the organisation that is taking it as to how big they would want the HMO to be.
Okay. Again, looking at the relationship between social housing provider and the council, do you find, I mean, I got indication that this is the case, that there's an interplay between the social housing provider and the council. The council will dictate what they do and don't want in terms of social housing in their area, in their town.
Not really.
Okay.
So certainly in Birmingham, it's not there is nothing laid down anywhere by the council that says that you can't have an HMO for social housing in a particular area.
I think each provider has their own criteria, don't they?
Yes.
Because I have worked with social housing companies before when we was developing properties. So we, maybe do 10 properties and 4 had to go to social housing. So I know they can differ, but a huge difference between one provider and another.
Yeah, and I think what you were talking
experience.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about there with development is different again, because obviously within a housing development, depends on the size of it, you've then got to provide a certain amount of property which is going to be available for social housing. What I'm just talking about is companies that want to lease properties to house.
No, sorry, no, I understand now. I was just making the point that each provider has different criteria.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And the reason I asked was I was talking to one of my fellow landlords in Luton, which is where most of my stock is, and he was going to lease out one of his big HMOs to a company providing accommodation for asylum seekers, but the council indicated to him the provider of accommodation for asylum seekers that it would not be a good idea, or that it didn't fall within. It was worded in such a way that the provider, the social housing provider, backed off.
Yeah, I think that's a totally sort of like different. I think a lot of the organisations that are housing the individual asylum seekers, not necessarily the asylum seeker families, but the individual asylum seekers, certainly in sort of like Birmingham and the Black Country and around here, we have to get postcode authorisation from them first, from the councils. So the councils will say to that provider yes or no. So again, we know in advance whether that house is going to be acceptable.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you and goodbye. I need to be somewhere else now. But it's been really good. It's been really informative. So thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Julie. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I think we might be competing with a football match at this point, Sue. Got a feeling.
Bye.
Am I right, James?
Well, about to say, I did tip you off earlier.
Who's playing tonight?
I don't know. I don't do football.
Nor me. I'm not a football fan.
All the Premiership games are being played at the moment. So if you...
Okay.
Can I chip in and say something?
Of course.
I'm just wanting to ask, what about having properties on rent to rent, or do you have to actually own the property to actually lease it to those providers?
No, it can work with rent to rent as well. Again, it's just a case of making sure then that your landlord has got the right mortgage and the right insurance in place. So he's not going to be breaching all of his mortgage conditions, and the company then is going to lease the property from you. They need to know as well that you're not the property owner, but that you actually have control of the property.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So in that situation, if you're in the rent to rent, you've effectively got your own agreement with the landlord, and then you have your agreement with the housing association.
Yeah, but you would probably want your agreement with the landlord pretty much to reflect the same terms, the same length of lease as you would have then with the housing provider.
Okay.
And if I can just add in there from some experience on it, you want to make sure that the landlord is responsible for his relationship with both his insurer and his mortgage provider. I've had a situation myself where the insurer was very happy for me to be running somebody else's HMO, as was the council. His mortgage lender was not.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something that I think it doesn't actually matter what the end use of the HMO is going to be, but it's whether or not rent to rent is actually agreed by the mortgage provider and the insurance company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does anybody else get any more questions? Melinda looks like she's had enough. Too many questions.
I have been on screen a lot today, I have to say. So yeah, your brain starts to freeze, doesn't it?
It does.
Scary.
I know that feeling.
It's, I suppose, because I'm quite early in my property journey, I don't know all the questions to ask necessarily at the moment, but it's an angle that I've been really seriously thinking about, but it's not something that other people necessarily talk about. You know, there's different strategies out there, but social housing tends to, as they shoved under the carpet, which is really quite poor.
Yeah, I think, sorry, all I would probably say to you is that if you are thinking about doing it, it's almost like the first step that I would say to you to do is to talk to a mortgage broker who understands social housing, so they will know which lenders to go to, because there's a very, very small pool of lenders.
Yeah, appreciate that, thank you. But I'm more likely to be having to go down the rent to rent model to start with, because I haven't necessarily got a lot of money sitting in the bank to even, and not a great income for the last 2 years either, to be able to necessarily get the mortgage myself. So but yeah, it was interesting to hear that it can work with rent to rent models as well. So
hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Sue, good afternoon, it's Nick Petridis here.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for your webinar you gave me about 2 months ago.
Oh, brilliant.
And I'm now bloody addicted, so it's all your fault. You have no idea. No idea. So it's all your fault. We know that. So, question one to number one is, I'm one of those really poor. I just want to get at it. I want to make life easier for me. So, if we have properties in Hemel Hempstead, as an example, 1-beds, studios, HMOs are HMOs, but we can give them to the housing association, etc. Could we work with you? Now, the reason I ask that is that I don't want to make 500 phone calls to. I've done it to about. I'm going to give it about 30 or 40 housing associations, and some of them it was like blasphemy. How dare you ask me that I'm going to take your property? Although I'm used to say, we used to do it, but we don't do it any longer. I take on other landlords' properties because we're building our own now. And I can see the economics on that. So do you work with landlords who are out of your Midlands area?
So there's a couple of people who I work with that I know are working with more national organisations. So yeah, we can have a look at it. I don't think they're going to want to particularly take the sort of like 1-bedroom or studio type properties. They're more likely to want to take HMOs. And I think the conversation that we had about yours is that you've done a really, really expensive conversion and you've got a beautiful house, in which case it's probably going to make you more money to rent it as a single buy-to-let.
That is the feeling I had. And the reason I've gone for the expensive refurb is to get an uplifting value to refinance it. That was the key driver behind it, to be honest. It was one of the pricier. And also, I've recently done a remortgage as an example. I'm going to say it's taken me 4 or 5 months purely because they want to see end of year accounts, etc., etc. So if we cannot rent a property to a housing association until that is in place, i.e. with a bona fide lender who accepts housing association, it could be a 3-month journey because it takes so long to refinance with the correct lender. So is it a showstopper not to be with a lender that approves of housing association